The webinar is now broadcasting. So welcome everyone.
I'm just going to stream to Facebook. Sorry, 1 second.
Sorry, if you just wait while Brodie, who is our tech guru, syncs the whole thing to Facebook, so we can hopefully throw this far and wide. But just firstly, thanks to everyone who's out there watching for showing up. This is a topic that is really dear to all of our hearts here and a really important topic at Zero to Hero. So thanks for taking the time out to show up. Really, really grateful for that. Thanks to Ashley at Zero to Hero, Ashley Harrison, our CEO, for organising this, and thanks to Brodie and Brad and Greg and Paul for showing up as well. So, Men's Health Week, a chance for us to discuss men's health in the context of what we're all about at Zero to Hero, which is mental health leadership. Really important topic. So, are we on Facebook there, Brodie?
We're just connecting now.
We're in the process of it.
Yep.
I don't think that'll take too long. So I'd love us to just maybe we'll just get straight into it. And if I can introduce you guys one by one, if you don't mind, just introducing shortly about yourself and why you're here and why you're linked to this cause. Maybe we could start with Greg. How do you feel like going first?
Absolutely fine. Thanks, Mike. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining in this evening for this call. My name is Greg Bain. I'm a psychologist. Been working as a psychologist for the last 20 years. The first 10 years focusing primarily on EAP or critical incident type of work. And the last 10 years been working with organizations around leadership and culture, mental well-being. And we've been delivering programs around mental well-being and resilience, not just in Australia, but globally. It's something I'm particularly passionate about, and particularly around men and how men need to be really looking after themselves far better than they currently are. So I'm keen to be involved and keen to share my thoughts on what we can be doing to enhancing our well-being.
Awesome. Thanks, Greg, and thanks for joining us. Brad, do you want to say a few words to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi. Thanks, guys. My name's Brad McIlroy. I have a small energy consulting business I started 3 years ago. My connection to mental health probably started with a pretty traumatic experience back in 2002, where I was on a football trip with 20 of my friends. There was a terrorist attack on the bar we were in, and 7 of the guys were killed. Since then, I've had to be really careful about how I manage my mental health ongoing. And off the back of that, I've become pretty passionate, like Greg said, about changing the sort of the stigma and the systematic issues we have with our young boys in the community.
Brilliant. Thanks, Brad. Thanks for joining us. And Paul Stine, the chairman of the board at Zero to Hero. Do you want to say a few words? Introduce yourself, Paul.
Hi, Mike. Hi, everybody there. Yes, I'm the chair of Zero to Hero. I've been involved with Zero to Hero now for 18 months. My background is I'm an oil and gas engineer of almost 30 years now. I have lived and worked around the world. I grew up in the UK in a time when there wasn't Facebook, mobile phones, social media. I was at boarding school in England, and I spent a lot of time with my grandparents who'd gone through the war. So I don't really know how my 3 children view the world, because my lenses are very different. I lived and breathed and associated with people that had gone through the war and had significant trauma to them. And I'm trying to be involved with the organisation because I would like to understand and arm myself with as much as I can regarding mental health issues, especially for the 3 young children that I'm bringing into the world. I'm also, my day job is I'm the Chief Operating Officer of SciTech. So I also have a lot to do with STEM in the community and also the education system. But I'm very passionate about Zero to Hero, and I'm glad to be part of this webinar tonight.
Amazing. Thanks, Paul. Thanks for joining us. And Brodie, Mack, you want to say some words about yourself?
Yeah, well, we're now live on Facebook, which is awesome. And yeah, my name is Brodie Mack. I'm a Zero to Hero Camp Hero alumni and now the head mentor on the Camp Hero programs. This sort of passion for mental health started back in 2015 when I did first go on Camp Hero. I sort of leading into it didn't really have much of an understanding around mental health and or mental illness at all. And then when I went on it, I realised that it was a massive passion of mine and something that I really wanted to make a difference, or an area I really wanted to make a difference in. And then in particular, men's mental health, when I came back and saw the statistics around it, that's why I knew that was something that I needed to be working towards to make a difference, and sort of dedicated the last couple of years of my life to be doing that with Zero to Hero, and also in my day job as a mentor and on the Christchurch Grammar Rite of Passage program as well. So yeah, I'm really excited to get this webinar underway.
Amazing. Thanks, Brodie. And really amazing to have your perspective as well. So it is Men's Health Week. I just want to read a few statistics that you may have already heard bashed about this week, but you may not be aware of, just to give us a little bit of context before we go into some deeper questions. The first one is that Australian men are more likely than Australian women to get sick from serious health problems such as heart disease, liver disease, various types of cancer, dementia and Alzheimer's disease, cerebrovascular disease, and chronic lower respiratory diseases, as well as diabetes and suicide. All of those things hit men harder than women. The mortality rate is much higher than their female counterpart, and on average, men live 4.4 years less. We die 4.4 years younger than women. 3 in 4 men in 2018 were measured as overweight or obese. 3 out of every 4 men, which is really significant in the ongoing effects from that. Younger boys between the age of 4 to 17 are more likely than girls to have experienced mental health disorders in the past 12 months. 70% of children with learning difficulties are boys, which is a really big statistic, 70%. And then interesting, flowing on from that mental health stat, despite boys being higher at risk for mental health issues, girls are more likely to access formal support, 80% more likely to access formal support, and 40% more likely to access informal support. I don't know the exact specifics of that, but around talking to friends, talking to parents, seeking support, help-seeking behaviours that we're seeing that men just aren't buying into. And men are more than twice as likely as women to have experienced substance use disorders. Men are at the greatest risk of suicide. 75% of suicides in Australia are men. And suicide is one of the 3 highest causes of death in Australia. Cardiovascular disease, motor vehicle accidents, and suicide are the top 3 causes as the deaths of men in Australia. So I just wanted to throw it out to the panel. These things that are slanted sort of and that hit men the hardest. Maybe we'll start with you again, Greg, as a qualified psychologist. Why do you think some of these things hit men the hardest? Oh, you're on mute there, Greg. Can we?
There you go. So that's a rookie error. I think. Yeah, it's a pretty scary statistic. It's worthwhile unpacking it a little bit, though, and I think it's important to understand that in terms of attempted suicides, there's close on 20 to 30 times as many attempted suicides for every completed suicide. In addition, the number, when we look at gender, in fact, there's more women who attempt suicide than men. However, far more men complete the suicide. And what this taught, and this is important to understand, because what it tells us is a couple of things. The first is, and they talk about intent to suicide, which is around what's the intention around suicide. And partly men also choose more aggressive forms of suicide, which means they tend to be more successful in the completion of the suicide. But I think more importantly, what it talks to is 2 things. And the first is that men, and you've mentioned already, are far less likely to seek help. And so we know, and there's been lots of studies into help-seeking behavior, but one study in particular, a global study, looking at men's help-seeking behavior across the world, different countries, different cultures, trying to understand what is it that contributed to men not seeking help. And they identified that what they call societal expectations. So these expectations placed on men that are different from what placed on women. And this starts right from an early age. So you've got young boys that are being told to not cry. You've got young boys who you just go into a store and you look at the girls' toys and the boys' toys. I mean, there's a whole lot of different messaging that boys get all the way through childhood. I had a chap share the other day that he's got a son and a daughter, and his son, they're both teenagers, will say he's going to go visit his friend who's a fair way away, and he's quite comfortable with his son hopping on his bike, riding to the train station, jumping on a train, heading out, going to meet his friend. His daughter says, I want to go meet a friend. He says, right, I need to know where you're going. I need you to mobile me when you get to the train station and you tell me when you're there. And he had this sudden realization of, I'm treating them differently. With my son, I'm more than happy to let him go. But my daughter, I'm going, no, you need to. And so all the way through, we're getting this different messaging around how boys need to be. And so when boys then reach adulthood, they have this definition of, I'm tough, I should be able to handle stuff, I'm the breadwinner. And these expectations, I think, are a significant contributing factor to men not seeking help. And then in addition to that, men don't pay attention to the early signs. So there's these early signs, and instead of noticing those early signs, they either self-medicate or they just ignore it. The typical male kind of coping strategy is just blinkers on and go full steam ahead, which means that the first time that a man goes, oh, I've got a problem, is now when he's got a significant problem. And now, by the time they get to that point in time, now the intent to suicide is right up there versus a woman who's much more likely to recognize the signs earlier and much more likely to seek help. And so I think we've got a major challenge around. For me, the most important thing we have to shift is the stigma around mental health. And in particular, men, in my view, have to really change the way we're working and the way we're thinking about ourselves.
Thanks, Greg. Any of the other guys have any other comments on that general divide between men seeking help and men not noticing those early stages? Any other comments from you guys?
Yeah, I'd say Greg hit the nail on the head there with a lot of that. I think we teach our boys to be emotionally disconnected from a really young age, and then try and let them just find their way through it when they get older in life to then sort of look inwards and understand their emotions and how they deal with it. And as Greg said, quite often it's far too far down the rabbit hole when they realise they've got a really big issue. And actions are far more drastic at that stage. I sort of look at myself and think I was probably quite lucky to have such a large experience that I was able to then get professional help and rather than just sort of carry on with the day-to-day. I got professional help. I was 19 years old. I then had to map my way, which emotions and dealing with emotions changed quite a lot as well as I went through my 20s. When I get quite emotional, I'd get quite angry and upset. That was my go-to emotion at the time. And then obviously seeking professional help taught me to deal with the emotion and try and understand it further and work my way through it rather than just allow myself to get sort of angry and release emotions that way. So it's an age-old problem. It's something we've been doing to boys for years is teaching them to harden up and toughen up and don't cry, don't be a soot, man up, all these comments that just continue to just pile up and a boy just never thinks he can release his emotions in probably the safe environment that we really need to start providing.
Thanks, Brad. And I'm interested with you, Paul, as a father, when we read out those stats about the difference between boys and girls, and both Greg and Brad have talked about how we are as parents putting these expectations on their kids. What's the reaction you have to that as a father, Paul?
I have a 12-year-old girl and a 10 and 9-year-old boy, so I've got both sides of the spectrum here. But just sort of echoing what Brad and Greg said there. I mean, I grew up in the UK at a boarding school, so I wasn't surrounded by my parents and family for a vast majority of the year, and it was a very it was an all boys boarding school, so there were very few female influences at all, and it was very much the case of that you weren't allowed to show emotion. So when I had my own children, and I was very lucky to have a wife that was able to counsel me and guide me through this. That we've taken the tact now that they're both the same. The two genders, they're both given the opportunity to express how they feel. We're very much of the opinion that they can express that it's okay not to be okay. In fact, that's actually the go-to for us at home. If they're having a bad day, we highly encourage them to talk about it. We gather as much around the table as possible. So as I said in my intro, I'm a little bit nervous because I don't really understand the social media world as much as the generations that's using it. I mean, iPhones only came out in 2007, so there's a lot of us that are still getting used to this kind of thing. So as a parent, I am nervous, and I arm myself with as much information as I possibly can to try and preempt some of the questions, noting that we're not going to have all of the answers to give them as we're a generation away from them. So it is scary. The statistics are very, very scary, and we should acknowledge that. And the more we talk about it, the more it becomes open. And those conversations are easy to be had, especially around the stigma of being a man and not being able to say anything about it. I think if we continue to improve the dialogue, we'll hopefully have a greater impact.
Thanks, Paul. And I just want to really thank you for acknowledging that fear we have as parents around not having all of the answers. I certainly am a man with teenagers myself, and they are growing up in a drastically different world, and I don't have all the answers, and I'm responding in the same way as you, trying to arm myself as much information as I can from experts, but also from my kids. Inquiring with them, what do you actually need from this? Why on earth are you engaging with this stuff? What is a TikTok? These are all questions I find myself asking.
I think that's a really good point there, Mike. Is that is the peer groups that the children are in have a dialogue that's uniform across them. And Ash and I met with a lovely lady today with as part of our Zero to Hero duties, and she sort of came out with the phrase that children see parents and adults as the enemies sometimes, and that's as a parent, we try to guide them and sort of lead them in the right direction as best we can. But at the end of the day, it comes down to their peer group, their friends, the people in the class, the people in their sporting groups. So we don't have necessarily the answers because we're not living their particular lives in their particular time.
Yeah, and seeking to understand from young people is super important. And speaking of young people, Brodie, Mack is our youngest panelist here, and also importantly, someone who works with young guys. The guys you work with at schools are 14-ish years old. So I'm interested in what you say, mate, around the changes. Are you seeing any changes generationally from how older men are in your lives and how we are around this help-seeking behaviour and then just pushing on and ignoring stuff versus younger guys? Are you seeing a difference in how things were for you and were for your parents and are for the young guys that you work with?
I think in particular, seeing through the young men that are coming through the Camp Hero program, we get some really incredibly self-aware young leaders that are just totally open to having these conversations and to opening up these conversations as well. So I certainly see it. I certainly also see that there are still some young men and some boys that are still stuck in that older way of thinking that that could have been passed down from parents, grandparents, whoever it might be. I think there definitely is a shift between the shift occurring with our young men and our boys I think that there's been so many more open discussions happening around the world and in the media as well. Like I think about when I was in year 12 and it was massive when Buddy Franklin came out and openly shared that he was dealing with depression, and I was like blown away that someone who was so influential and you know, at the highest level of his game could come out and say, yeah, I'm struggling, and put his hand up and take some time away from finals footy as well. I thought that was really admirable of him, and what that was a massive point for me, and I can sort of agree that that's set the ball rolling for a lot more other sports personalities and media personalities as well. So I think our young men definitely have more than just the parent influence or the grandparent influence. They're totally open to this world of so many different opinions that are coming at them, and more accessible to seeing or hearing what their idols might say, whether it's on the sporting field or an actor or a musician or whoever it might be. So
awesome. Thanks, Brodie. And
can I jump in there again?
Yeah, please do, Greg. Please. I was actually just going to throw to you and see if you had any.
Yeah.
Perfect.
So I guess, well, there's two things. The first is, and there's no doubt, I think this generation now coming through, you know, I think about me and my grandfather. My grandfather and I used to shake hands. That was the extent of our emotional exchange, was shaking hands. You know, me and my father, you know, I didn't hug my father. I remember seeing a father kiss his son once on the way, dropping his son at school, and I couldn't believe it. I'm going, there's a father kissing his son. What's going on there? You know, and whereas now I think we've got a generation of parenting us different. There's a generation that are talking differently. However, when you look at the statistics around help-seeking behavior in men, nothing's changed. And so that is the issue for me, is we can talk about it all we like. We can have all these conversations, but it actually hasn't changed the stigma. It hasn't changed men's help-seeking behavior.
So from your perspective, Greg, yeah. I just want your perspective as a psychologist, that lack of help-seeking behavior. You mentioned the cultural expectations, and you mentioned the stigma around mental health. Are those the two big things that need to shift, or is there more to it than that?
So I think, I mean, to a certain extent, it's a bit of ego as well. I think as men, we've got to get over ourselves a little bit. But I also think, and it's really interesting. I think, you know, we have all these guys coming out and talking, which is fantastic. And, you know, and Brad, you've got a powerful story to share. But my concern is all the stories that the men are sharing are still stories where there's been big significant events. So essentially a man can explain, well, the reason I'm depressed is because I was in front of an explosion, or the reason I'm depressed and anxious because I was hit by a bus, or because the reason I'm depressed and anxious is because my leg was blown off while I was at war. You know, so all the stories we're hearing about men suffering from mental illness are still these stories of big, massive events. You know, I just wish someone could stand up and say, you know what, I am depressed because my cat isn't the way it's supposed to behave. You know, something like that. You know, yeah. So, and that's how and I think we've got to start changing the way we're talking about mental illness. Yeah. We've got to, we still, just the way we talk about it, we're stigmatizing it. The way we overreact. You know, I see this in workplaces where someone, you know, discloses they're on antidepressant medication, and then everyone panics. The leader panics, HR panic, everyone panics, going, can they do their job? You know, and you go, hold on, it's just antidepressant medication. They're depressed. Seriously, you know, it's not a train smash. You know, and so I think we've got to change the way we're reacting to mental illness. We've got to change the conversation entirely.
Thanks, Greg. I think you've raised a really, really important point. And one thing that I notice is I hear a lot of stories of people saying, I had this issue and then I had this problem with anxiety, depression, and it was difficult and I've gotten through it. Whereas I don't hear a lot of people saying, I continue to struggle with an ongoing problem. And so that's another part of it. Brad, do you want to tell us about your ongoing struggle?
Oh no, that's just it. You know, Greg once again summed it up really well. We've got to change how we talk about it. We've got to allow. It shouldn't have to take an incident for it to be okay to be upset. It's, you know, life could just be beating you up, and it should be okay and acceptable to say, hey, I'm having a pretty rough time at the moment. I can't even put my finger on what it is. I'm just not myself at the moment, you know, and that's got to be okay. You know, coming from sort of the football club background, and having a father who was very much involved in that himself from his father, and we're told that sort of men need to be these staunch, loyal, proud, you know, macho sort of figures, but there's no reason why you can't include compassionate and considerate and emotional and gentle in that same conversation. You know, I put my hand up then because my issue does take constant work. You know, I need to look after myself. If I don't, I end up in a hole where I need to try and get myself out of. You know, I'm 36 years old and I'm flat out in business, and yeah, I love going out and catching up with friends. But if I do that too often, I start to realize that I'm not myself, and then I need to sort of wind it back, and I need to eat well and get exercise and prioritize sleep and all these things, or I can't beat myself up for when I don't feel good. You know, it's a constant thing. I've got my head around it being a constant thing. Even sometimes when I do feel like I'm not myself, even just admitting to myself that I'm not great is often enough to go, okay, you've accepted that. You know the appropriate measures you need to take from here. So look after yourself. Don't beat yourself up too much, and get back on your path. So, yeah, like Greg said, we need to change the conversation. We need to start just accepting that the guy sitting in the table, the office chair next to you, you don't know what he's got going on in his home life. You know, the people you sit next to on the bus or you walk past in the street, you just don't know what people are going through. And as you get older, I think we all appreciate that everyone's got something going on, you know?
Yeah. Thanks, Brad. It's interesting for me. I am an anxiety sufferer, and I often tell the story of how I found myself in the emergency department back when Freo Hospital was open in 2014. But I don't often tell the story that on Monday of this week, I had some anxiety and I had to work my way through it and work out how to deal with it. It's much more difficult for me to say that than to tell people that I've got a stress fracture in my right shin or a meniscus tear in my left knee, of which I have both, you know, that I'm asthmatic. Whereas when I say I'm an anxiety sufferer, I'm almost noticing myself wanting to duck for cover, expecting to, you know, have people throwing, you know, weapons at me or something like that. I'm just interested whether Brodie or Paul have any comments, like when you hear a man open up and say, this is going on for me, what's the reaction for you?
Yeah, I think I'd just like to say that I think we're all anxiety sufferers to some degree. I was really interested when I started an MBA back in 2009, and one of the units came up with this phrase called self-talk, and I'd never heard of self-talk before, and I worked through the unit and thought, oh no, this is just, I'm just gonna have to write an assignment on this. But I think back to the 12 or so years since I've done that, and that's possibly one of the best pieces of value that I added during my MBA, because you do think about it. Your mind goes off. People sometimes are predisposed to being negative, or they're predisposed to being positive, optimist, pessimist, right? And the glass half full, glass half empty. I know that I fight the glass half empty. I fight that every day. I know that's me. And I use the positive self-talk to just talk myself through what I'm grateful for. I've got 3 amazing kids. My wife and I have our 25th anniversary this year. I mean, it's just, there's so much to be grateful for. And that's the positive self-talk that you've got to anchor yourself to. But that's by no means always a winner. I mean, I have days where I go, oh no, what am I doing? This is terrible. And you physically feel yourself getting dragged down. And until you can kind of lasso that optimism and that positive self-talk, you you get into those doldrums. So yeah, I think we're all anxiety sufferers. It's just the degree to which we suffer it and the degree to which we can immediately reflect that it's there and how to drag ourselves out of it.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. And it is interesting. Like, not all of us have a clinically diagnosable anxiety or depression, but all of us have had times where we've found life very difficult, and all of us have felt fear. I do a lot of workshops with men, and I say, has anyone ever experienced fear in their lives? Put your hand. I've never had someone not put their hand up yet. It's all something we experience. We all experience fear, anger, shame, all of those emotions. It's a question of how deeply we get stuck in those things. Is anything coming up for you there, Brodie? Any comments you've got on what we've been talking about just now?
Yeah, just to answer your question from before about, how do I react, or how do I feel hearing men say that they're suffering or going through whatever. I'm quite an empathetic person, so I sort of feel sad for them and can try and walk alongside them and try and feel that as well. But I also feel incredibly proud of any person, man, woman, any person that tells me that they're struggling. I feel incredibly proud that they're opening up and sharing their story with me and sharing their story with the world as well. So yeah, when it comes to hearing men or young boys say, yeah, I'm struggling with anxiety, or I've had a really bad day, yeah, there's a great deal of pride there, and also a lot of care. I just sort of sit down and say, well, what's going on, and really just be a listening ear. So yeah, that's what comes up for me.
Amazing. Thanks, Brodie. Yeah, I also want to go back to one thing that you mentioned, Greg. You talked about, you saw the dad kissing his son on the way to school, and it was such a huge, I could have never have imagined seeing that when I was in school. A dad kissing their son. What bizarre. I'm reading a book at the moment by Vivek Murthy, who was the Surgeon General in the US, like the highest ranking medical officer in the United States of America. And he's chosen to write a book about human connection. And he talks about 3 human needs that we all have. We all have a need for friendship, firstly. We all have a need to belong to part of a group and to feel a sense of common purpose. But we all have a need for intimacy, people in our lives who deeply understand us on that emotional level. And men tend to get less of that third need met. So I'm just wondering if you, Greg, or anyone else has any comments around that need that we have as men for that deeper intimacy that we seem somehow struggle to get.
Yes, maybe I'll jump in. And so for me, managing our mental health and well-being, for me, it's very much around managing our neurochemistry. And so part of it's about reducing our cortisol as much as possible. It's about keeping our dopamine and serotonin levels up as high as possible. And really, that in a nutshell is how we manage well-being. And I'll talk more later on about some strategies around that. But there's a neurochemical called oxytocin, and I'm sure you've probably heard of oxytocin. It's released particularly in women when they're breastfeeding. And what it does is it creates this connection between a mum and a child. So when women talk about that maternal instinct, it's actually coming from oxytocin. Oxytocin creates that connection between people. Oxytocin also, very importantly, counteracts cortisol. Oxytocin increases healing time. It reduces it improves our immune system, and so oxytocin is critically important for us in terms of a well-being perspective. Now, us men, we can stimulate oxytocin by having a deep and meaningful conversation. And so when we sit down with a close friend, we share something personal about what's happening with us, whatever it is. It actually stimulates oxytocin. And that oxytocin not only draws us closer to that person and creates a connection, but it also counteracts cortisol. And so for me, as men, if there's one thing we do differently, it's start having more deep and meaningful conversations. And this is a discipline. This is about, and for me, discipline and well-being go hand in hand. I do lots of work with people who are not well, who are struggling for whatever reason. And the work we do with them is often predominantly around creating more discipline in their life. So discipline around actions, discipline around what am I thinking, discipline around behaviors, discipline about doing some exercise. And so discipline and well-being are very, very strongly correlated. And us men, we need to be disciplined about actually talking to other men, having a conversation with other men. I just think it's one of the most critical ways for us as men to start being more well.
Yeah, that's amazing, Greg. Being disciplined enough to make the time to have those deeper chats that build that oxytocin flow. And I understand oxytocin also grows with physical contact, giving your partner a hug, giving your mate a hug, all of those kind of things. Does that resonate for you, Brad?
Yeah, definitely. I'm a hugger naturally. I think I've sort of certainly got a few mates to sort of start getting into that mind frame as well. But Greg discussed having these conversations. I think they work on so many levels. Being that, if you yourself become vulnerable and are okay about talking about your issues, it doesn't just create a deeper connection. You're also allowing your mate who might, be of the old men's mindset, you're allowing them the opportunity to speak on their problems as well. I know so many mates that just would never discuss until there is that one fraction of an opportunity, and then it just all comes out, and it's because you allowed yourself to be vulnerable. You spoke deeply on your things that affect you. And you just create such a far deeper bond and a far deeper connection. And, as you grow older, all I want to do is surround myself with good people that I have these deep connections with, and they become a great network for me when I'm not doing well, but also people know that they can pick up the phone and have a far easier conversation with me because I'm willing to put myself in that space for them. I think it works on so many levels.
Yeah, I think that's really important. Your ability to open up and be vulnerable has allowed other people then to know, oh, Brad's a bloke I can talk to. Yeah.
And not being in a position to judge or, oh, really? Oh, you just want to sit. Sometimes you don't need to say anything. Just sit there and be an ear. We need more blokes having conversations like those.
Yeah, and you don't need to be a qualified psychologist to have a chat with your mate. The key is to, if your mate's really struggling, help him to go and see a qualified psychologist. That, I think, is the big thing, to create that conversation. And
I think, in the last decade, we've seen a lot of changes in the mental health space where what's available, there's far more understanding about what's available. Only recently did I hear that places like Beyond Blue are actually a service where you can call up as a carer or a friend on, okay, I've got a friend in this situation. How, what strategies, how do I go about dealing with this stuff? I always thought it was just a helpline that if you were really down in the dumps, that's who you call, not as a support person. So, it's a really valuable service that they offer to talk you through how to support a mate, because where else are we learning those skills? How to have a conversation with someone who's really struggling. I think the "Are you okay?" message is massive, but do we know how to respond if we get a "Actually, I'm not okay" message? Those are things we need to learn and practice. What about you, Paul? Are you getting enough hugs and enough deep chats in your life at the moment?
Yeah, look, I was listening to Greg bringing it up in the first instance there, and smiling because ironically, while my parents abandoned me to a boarding school, I always had a very, very loving relationship with my father. We were huggers and kisses from a young age, and even with my grandfathers. Growing up, and then this is the early 70s, so that was pretty progressive for my grandfathers to be huggers and kissers. So that's sort of what instilled in me. And then I think about the times that I spent a lot of my time going down to see my grandparents at half terms and things, because my parents were overseas, and there was a lot of women in the house. There was my grandmother, many aunties, and all sorts of others around. So I had this very heavy female influence for a week of half term, and then back to an all male boarding school with no females and masters. So kind of had this yin and the yang. But I'm a very tactile person. I'm very, very tactile with my children. Maggie Dent came up in conversation with Ash again today, and Maggie espouses this process where we have to go, we should go through and tell our children how much we love them, because it's very important that they know that they're loved a lot. So I think as a society in 2020, we're certainly a lot better off than we were when I was born in the 70s. And I think it was interesting that Greg mentioned there that while we're getting better, we're still not actually going to seek the help or having those conversations. So as a leader in a business, I am constantly focusing in on the people and saying to them, how are you going today? I mean, it is not important enough. Your job is not important enough that if you're not feeling great, that you just go home and get yourself in a good headspace, or go and find someone to talk to. Or I am always available to chat to people, and certainly they know that I'm involved with Zero to Hero, and that gives a little bit of authenticity that I have that conversation with them. But I think, yeah, it's interesting around the men issue. I think we put it on ourselves to be this these strong people that shouldn't bend and that shouldn't show emotion. And I think we need to really model better behavior for our children, so that they're growing up seeing that it is the modeling being done by the parents is okay, so they can do it themselves.
Amazing. Thanks, Paul. And I love what you said about telling, Maggie's advice to tell our kids, why we love them. One of my mentors in this work, Dr. Arna Rubinstein, who wrote The Making of Men, says, often guys around our age, I'm grouping us together there, Paul, I don't know how old you are, I'm 43. My dad never really told me that he loved me. And whereas a lot of parents now are telling our kids, yeah, I love you, but are we telling them why and what we love about them, and going that next level and having a deeper kind of communication around that kind of stuff? So that's an interesting change that I think that is starting to happen. I wonder about you, Brodie. I know in your work, there's a lot of deep chats that happen. There's a lot of high fives and man hugs. How does it affect you as a young guy, having guys that you can deeply connect with through your work, and does that flow on into other friendships for you?
Yeah, I think it's really cool seeing 14 to 17-year-old boys sitting down and being given an opportunity to have a conversation. It was mentioned before, I think it was Brad that said that your mate, once you opened up, he found the courage to open up as well. And I see it all the time, where it takes just one person to maybe even just say, yeah, I'm struggling today. And then there's just a flow-on effect where you get these other incredible young men that say, yeah, this has happened to me in my life. I'm struggling with this. This has happened, whatever it might be. It's quite funny. You talk about the man hugs or hugs, as I call them. They are, the boys love it. I think the boys love the high fives and the group handshakes or whatever, because it brings them closer together. It brings them. I think you were talking about it to me the other day about how it shows that they're part of a community and they're a unit. So yeah, it's quite funny. You come up to some bizarre handshakes, but the boys will cling on to it, and we'll see them 3 months down the track or 6 months down the track, and they'll still remember. And I'll have 7 different groups handshakes that I have to remember and think, oh yeah, got it. But yeah, the boys love the connection, as we talked about before, and they are just waiting for an opportunity to share what's going on in their life. They might not think it's the biggest thing, but if they have something they want to share, then that's their story, and that's still huge to us. So yeah.
Amazing.
Mike, can I just add something to that? I mean, Brodie will know this very well, being part of our Camp Hero program, is that when we get the groups to go on the camps, there's a lot of opening up. There's a lot of exercises that bring forth some emotion, and this is a really good thing in the group, because the boys are able in a safe space to demonstrate the emotions that they're feeling, whereas 50 years ago, that was just not really the done thing. So it is something that that certainly I see within Zero to Hero bringing just one of the great value adds. Went along to one of the camp graduations late last year, and again, that emotion was on show outside of the camp. They felt comfortable, and I just think it's a great I'd like to say skill that we're giving the young people, not just the men, but men especially, given the topic we're talking about. But it's a skill that you can learn, that it's okay to show emotion and to have people supporting you around that. Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks, Paul. Yeah, it's an amazing opportunity that we offer through the camps, the Camp Hero, through Zero to Hero. And talking of what we can do about it, maybe I'll start with you, Greg. You mentioned strategies earlier. What can we do about this as blokes, and not just for ourselves? I'm also interested in strategies around, like Brad said, how can we support a mate?
Yeah. So yeah, a great question. So I think, so starting on ourselves, I think as men, we need to really make the effort to connect to other men. So I know in my life, I walk Monday, Wednesday, and Friday mornings. We meet at 5:30 in the morning, and I walk with two other blokes who are great blokes. They, sometimes the conversation's a lot of fun, humorous, and other times it's serious. And then we walk for 40 minutes and have coffee. I paddle 3 times a week on the ocean with a whole bunch of guys, and particularly Saturday morning, there's close to 60, 70, sometimes 80 paddlers on the water. Majority are men. And then we get off after a pretty hard training session, and we sit down and have breakfast together. And I know for me personally, that time where I'm having that conversation with other blokes is absolutely critical for my mental health. Being able to, and sometimes we talk about stupid stuff, and sometimes we talk about serious stuff. But I think as men, we need to be much better at connecting. And I see so many men in their 40s and 50s, and they ask them, have you got a best mate? And they'll go, well, I socialize every now and then with a couple of blokes. And I go, but do you have a close friend? And so many men in their 40s and 50s do not have a close friend. And so I think it starts with us men making sure that we connecting with other men. And even as young boys, Brodie, blokes your age, it's about making sure that boys, when they leave school, because there are lots of boys that have got friends at school, they leave school and then everything disappears. Their whole network of friends is gone. They go overseas, they go to university, whatever it is, they split up. And so boys have to be better at making friendships again and connecting with other people. And then, so that for me, that's a really important piece. The second piece is, and I'm a big fan of Are You Okay? And I think it's fantastic, the fact we have an Are You Okay day is awesome. But I could ask any one of you guys, hey, mate, are you okay? Paul, are you okay? Brad, are you okay? And our typical response is, yeah, I'm fine. I'm good. And that's how most blokes respond. And so I think we need, are you okay? For me, is not enough. We need to go beyond the are you okay? And I think we need to have much more courage to say to someone, Paul, I don't think you're okay. You look terrible today. And we need to start being much more honest with each other about how we're experiencing each other. And for me, are you okay isn't enough. We need to actually be saying, I don't think you're okay.
Yeah, to actually be proactive enough to even prompt a mate to have that conversation.
Are you okay? In Australian culture, are you okay? The typical response is, yeah, I'm fine.
Yeah.
And the other thing, and the psychological reason behind this is that most of us judge that feeling of am I okay based on my sleep and my energy levels. Now, I might be an emotional wreck. I'm frustrated. I'm annoyed. I'm distracted. I'm upset. But I've slept okay, and I wake up in the morning. I'm energized enough to get through the day. So if someone asks me, "Are you okay?" I go, "Yeah, I'm okay." So that's how we judge, "Are you okay?" What we need to be much better at is asking questions like, "What's distracting you? What's frustrating you?" Those questions get below that, "Are you okay?" And that, for me, that's where we need to go to. We need to go to another level of conversation that's way beyond the "Are you okay?" "Are you okay?" is not enough anymore.
That's awesome, and I think that's what you've talked about, making the effort to connect, finding the courage to be more open and honest. But actually, that's a skill. Asking those deeper questions, asking the next question: "Are you really okay?" How's your relationship? How's work going for you? All of those kind of questions, probing a little bit deeper. And when we make the effort to connect on a regular basis, we're more likely to notice when a bloke is struggling. I think we're incredibly lucky, as much as the online stuff can be very distracting. When a mate moves to the UK, we can stay connected with that guy. When a mate moves to New Zealand, to Melbourne, to somewhere else, then we do have the capacity to stay connected to those guys. We just have to absolutely make the effort. I think that is absolutely huge. And the other thing you said is, sometimes we talk about the serious stuff. Sometimes we talk about the stupid stuff. I actually truly believe that talking about the stupid stuff is hugely important. We need to keep talking about stupid stuff as men to keep ourselves at that. I talked about the 3 levels of connection. It's not all about the deep, intimate stuff. We actually have a physiological need to laugh at stupid stuff as humans, men or women. What else, Brad? You mentioned ongoing struggles, going back to the issue that caused your issues. What are strategies that have worked for you? And I should mention at this point, we'll throw it open soon to some questions. So if there's people out there viewing on Facebook or on the Zoom chat itself, just throw some questions in the chat bar, and we'll see if we can get to them later on. Are there any strategies that you find particularly useful, Brad?
Yeah, I suppose it took me a long time to really acknowledge what was going on with myself personally. In fact, it was Ash in a conversation we had last year. She asked me to do some speaking for Zero to Hero, and I remember saying, "Ash, I don't really feel comfortable standing up in front of a heap of people saying that I'm a mental health expert." And she said, "You don't need to, but are you an expert of your own mental health?" And I said, "Absolutely, I am." I think strategies in this sort of area might not come down to, okay, step 1 is X, step 2 is X, step 3 is X, because I think everyone appreciates different things at different times with issues like this. I had to work out what my issue was and how I react, and then therefore how I go about appreciating and acknowledging what issues are there, and then what makes me feel better. Now, I love sport. I love walking in the bush. I grew up on farms. So what works for me is probably something very different to what works for someone else. I'll go out into the bush and take the dog for a walk, or I might go and chop a tree down on a mate's farm, or catch some yabbies and spend some alone time. And that works for me. If I'm really in the dumps, I make a phone call to certain people and sort of talk it out. And often that's for me is one of the real catalysts that makes me sort of appreciate what issues are going on, and steps to take forward. But as I said, I'm an expert on my mental health, and I've really come to know what signs set things off and what signs appear, to know when and how I need to get help. So depending on what shows itself, but as I said, that might not work for the next person. They've got to realise their own specific signs and how they appropriately take the right sort of course and measures.
Excellent. Thanks, bro. I just want to probe you a bit deeper on that. You said the alone time, bit of activity, time in the bush, and even picking up the phone. Do you still, having struggled with stuff for quite a long period of time, do you still find it hard to pick up the phone and to call a friend?
It's much easier. It definitely gets easier, especially I've got such a great relationship with the counsellor that I had years ago, and I'm so fortunate that basically I was able to speak to him so early. We came back as a 13 guys that were all pretty broken after that experience, and I was one of I think only 2 or 3 that accepted the help that was on offer. I was 19 and I thought, what did I have to lose from putting myself in that environment? I was always a bit of a talk the talk when it came to, if you want help, you've got to put your hand up and want help rather than just expect to get better from stuff. So I thought, what's the worst that can happen? I can only come out of this 6 months later saying that didn't work. So I put myself in that environment, and I'm so lucky I did. I'd hate to think where I'd be if I didn't speak to Hans, who was my counsellor at the time. And as I said, it hasn't been easy to know when that time is to pick up the phone. I now appreciate, as I said, that it does come a time, and it's a hell of a lot easier to do it earlier in the piece than later. And so it's all those little things. The older you get, the more you sort of become aware of your issues and how to go about it, as I said. But everyone's different. I just hope people learn to pick up that phone a lot earlier in the piece.
Yeah, and by continually picking up that phone, my experience is that it just tends to get easier and easier. So
to stop you there, often just me acknowledging that I need to pick up the phone is enough to not even have to make the call. For me, it's a big acknowledgement, personal acknowledgement thing is, hey, you're not doing well. Look at the signs. You haven't been looking after yourself. You've got no one to blame for feeling as you do. But, get yourself back on track. If you need to go ahead and make the phone call, but often just going, wow, it's time. I've got to pick the phone up. Often that for me, and that is just me, but often for me, that is just enough to realise, that's what's got to happen.
Yeah. So I just had a bit of a comment through from the Facebook feed. There's some people that joined in hearing you talk, but didn't hear your story earlier. So to give those people a bit of an idea, you mentioned earlier you're involved in you're affected by a terrorist attack overseas. Do you want to give a quick 30 seconds?
Yeah, no problem. So I was playing for an amateur football club. We just won a grand final. Mind you, I'd just been dropped for that game. I was one of the younger blokes in the side. However, all year we'd been keying up to go to Bali for our end of year football trip. This was in 2002. We went away. We flew out Saturday midday, October the 12th. October the 12th, got to Bali, basically unpacked our bags in our rooms, went for dinner that night, and then walked into the Sari Club. And at 11:10, a couple of bombs went off, one in a bar called Paddy's, which was across the road from where we were at the Sari Club, which was a terrorist with a bomb in a backpack, which was basically there to scare everyone out onto the street, where there was a car van full of explosives, which was detonated a minute or so afterwards. Ended up killing 202 people, 88 which were Australians, and 7 of them my mates. I was in the Surrey Club 8 metres away from the bomb when it went off. I had a girl sitting beside me who was killed immediately. One of my best mates sitting on the other side of the table. He didn't make it out of there either. So it was a pretty awful, pretty tragic situation, to say the least. The days that followed were pretty hard. We made an effort to sort of hang around as long as we could and try and identify any of the guys in the hospitals and morgues. We didn't really want our mates' families to come over and have to do what we were already there, and they were our mates. So there was a fair bit of pride that went into us doing what we could in the situation. 4 days later, we were told we'd done all we could, and so it was time to come home. So in hindsight, I've done a lot of reading on how to sort of push through, well, not how to push through, but how to move past scenarios like that in your life, and how to reflect on them. And obviously coming home as a 19-year-old, I was really angry, and I struggled a lot with survivor's guilt. You know, I was 19, a lot of the guys were older and were in, you know, far more structured relationships and wives and businesses and the like. And I thought I was just a kid. And if someone was going to go, it would have been much easier if I had of. And so I struggled with that a lot. But sort of having gone through a lot of professional help and trying to become aware, not of why things happen, but what you can take from situations. I struggled with the thought of it for a bit until I sort of looked at it through a new set of glasses. But I thought, if I can take some positives out of a situation like this, like for instance, it's happened so early in your life, what positive messages do you want to come out of that with? And things like how I care for family and friends. You know, I don't sweat the menial stuff in life that a lot of people and social media and, you know, concerns people so much. And I just don't allow that sort of stuff to affect my life. I look at the big picture stuff. As I said, I'm a hugger, but, you know, I tell all my mates that I love them, and they know that comes from a very sincere place. That's not a throwaway comment. I make sure they hear it, because I want them to know, you know. So anyway.
Thanks so much for sharing it. And thanks so much for sharing all those bits around keeping yourself healthy. And Paul, I imagine you as a COO at SciTech and as chairman at Zero to Hero and 3 kids, doesn't sound like the most chilled out, slow paced life I can imagine. What strategies do you use to keep yourself mentally healthy?
Yeah, look, being from the UK, I usually, my go-to is the self-deprecating humour, which we're mostly known from. And just to leverage off that, I'd like to acknowledge that Brad stumbled across something that I think we all know, that it's very difficult to say no to Ashley. So yeah, that's just wanted to make sure I acknowledge that, Brad. You're not the only one that struggles to say no to her. So yeah, look, I generally go to humour if I can. I find humour very cathartic. I grew up watching a lot of the original sort of Monty Python and Young Ones and Blackadders, that are very classic British stiff upper lip humour type thing. So that's usually my strategy. The kids will say, sat down at dinner, that Daddy is the funny one, which annoys my wife intently. But that's kind of my go-to. Something that was said earlier regarding the asking the deeper questions as well, that we try to sit down as a family and have dinner as many times a week as is practical, giving school and after school sports and things and activities. And I will always ask the kids what happened in their day that they liked, and what happened in their day that they didn't like, and what happened that they might want to change. So we're trying to get this as a common practice now with the children, to try and just dig a bit deeper to how was your day. And again, just learning to have those conversations, both they'll ask me the same thing, and I will be open and honest with them about my day, although for them there is no job that would be being at SciTech. So it's difficult for me to say that it was anything is a difficult part of the day. But yeah, and generally, I should exercise a lot more. I don't. I try to be as healthy as I possibly can. I try to walk everywhere I can, as opposed to catching the bus or the train in and around the CBD. But my biggest strategy, as I alluded to before, is just stopping and giving myself a little bit of a mental slap and saying, right, there's no point in talking negatively. Assess the situation. What can I do to change how I'm going about that situation? And making sure that I know a lot of people around me have good days and bad days, but trying to not be trying not to have too much of a negative influence if my day's not going so well either, because I find that negativity seems to bond like ions and it can grow. So yeah, humor and just really just trying to make sure that we've got so much to be grateful for.
Amazing. Thanks for that. And Martin Seligman from the University of Pennsylvania would talk about activating the hope circuit, and humor and gratitude are two important things to build up positive mental well-being. And on that there is actually a list that I've got here of things that men actually do on a regular basis to keep themselves healthy. Using humor is one of them. Eating healthy, exercise, spending time with a pet is a really common thing for blokes to do. Hang out with people who are positive. So there are actually a lot of things. Are there any of those that, and I'm starting to get a few questions through from the Facebook. Sharon asked which was the helpline that can give advice to people who are dealing, caring for someone else, helping for a mate. It was Beyond Blue, wasn't it, Brad?
Beyond Blue, Lifeline, Pucker Up. There's an amazing amount these days. Yeah.
Yeah. Beyond Lifeline, I know definitely, and we will add the comments later on. This is big topics here. If they stir something up for you, do find the courage to call those numbers. We'll make the numbers available in the chat here, Lifeline and Beyond Blue. Before I get to you, Brodie, I want to ask you about your strategies for staying healthy in a sec. We've just had a question from Jeff, who's a man in his 50s. And he said he's really sick and tired of blokes who pick out one guy and start the good-natured ribbing, which, I'm getting the vibe that it turns out in actually just picking on a mate. How do you tell other guys that this isn't okay behaviour? How do you be the one who's able to not just be a bystander, but actually stand up for this behaviour and say, this is not the way we can be good men with each other? Anyone got a comment on that?
So I know that with a group of mates, we just know where the line is, and I know it's probably harder to draw the line years down the track of being in a friendship circle. But we know that we can have a laugh with each other, and that we can rib each other about my career batting average or how many goals I kicked or whatever it is. But when it crosses the line that we sort of all know that is there, we say, hold on, or that's off the cards or whatever. I can't imagine that it would be an incredibly hard thing to do, to stand up to a group of mates that have been a friendship circle for many years. But it is just about standing up and saying, hang on a second, like that's not right. That's not how we operate, and then sort of creating a line from that.
Yeah, so what you're saying is you've got to create a culture in that group that we can actually call each other out and say, you've actually stepped over the line. One of the big things for me is having a language that feels okay. Sometimes you get talked about, sending a message of that's not okay. Well, I don't often turn around to my friend and say, I'm just letting you know that that's not okay behavior. Like, I've got to find my own authentic way of doing it, which might be, oh, I think you've crossed the line there, mate. And actually pulling him aside, like after the effect. So rather than trying to stand up in front of the group, there's often that shame that comes with it. Just pulling him aside and go, oh, I reckon what you've said to Tim over there, maybe you've crossed the line. I reckon he's a bit sensitive on that. Let's look out for it. Pulling him aside one-on-one, I think, can be an effective way on that. Anyone else got any other thoughts on how to pull up a mate?
Yeah, so I've got a slightly different slide. I guess I got two perspectives. The first is a lived experience. I used to have a terrible stutter through high school and through the first couple of years of university, and I had a whole bunch of friends, particularly in university, who just they teased the crap out of me. How do you spell Greg? It was, my nickname was Jabba. It was just, I got absolutely shredded. Every single time I spoke, the guys would rip me to pieces. And you know what? I'm grateful. Instead of, them sort of, we've all experienced this, where we see someone who's not, this, you know, they're not great at something or whatever it is, and we see it, but we don't want to embarrass them, and almost by not, you know, by trying to suppress our response, we embarrass them even more, because then now they're conscious that they know and we know and everyone knows and no one's saying anything, and so there was something cathartic about my friends just, you know, taking the piss, but I knew it was a genuine. There was no malintent in it. So it was a genuine. They cared for me. It was a deep care, but they still took the piss, and I'm grateful for that. So so out of that experience, for me, there's something about what's the intent. So as soon as the intent is a hurtful intent, that for me is completely unacceptable. So that is I don't want anyone in my friendship group who is intentionally going to try and hurt someone else. I don't think that's okay at all. But I do think there's some space for, as men, to have a bit of that banter. And then if I feel like it's gone too far, I just ask the question, hey guys, have we taken that too far?
Yeah. And
it's a great question just to ask the group, have we taken that too far? You know, and I remember with these two blokes I went walking with, I remember we were talking and we were having a coffee and we were having a bit of a conversation. There was a bit of banter. And I got a text message from my mate later on that day saying, did we go too far? You know, so they asked the question of me, did they go too far? But I think you know, there's a balance, and I think we are living in Australia. Australian culture, particularly for men, is a bit of banter, and sometimes that banter is a helpful way to actually get something across the line when you want to say something. So I'm a bit torn. I think there's something about we do need to. For me, it's about the intention, and as long as there's good intent. Then sometimes it's just a conversation, mate. Do you think we took that too far? I'm just asking the question.
Yeah,
and if they've got good intent, I think they'll absolutely recognize that.
Yeah, I love, Greg, that you're responding with curiosity there. It's like, well, you know, what do we do here? So rather than accusing and saying you're being a douche or whatever, really responding with a sense of. I think it's a hugely important question, Jeff, and I really thank you for asking that, because I think every group of mates in Australia potentially has struggles with that same thing, and I think you're important. Like I keep saying, that need for friendship, Greg, is hugely important. We need to have a laugh. It's hugely part of Australian culture, and I don't think we should ban banter, but I do think it's important to know how to notice when we've crossed the line and gone too far. I just want to call attention on that kind of topic to a comment that we had from Emily in the Zoom chat earlier about changing our language when we're communicating with men. You know, she's talking about using the word to fortify, and I think it was a comment you made earlier, Brad, about when you talked about pushing through or moving past a mental health problem. You know, how do we use from manning up to finding our inner resilience? I think there's healthy ways of. Because, you know, I want to live in a world where I can get support when I need it, but also get things done when I need to get things done as well. I don't think the answer is to turn us all into a bunch of softy snowflakes. So what thoughts do you guys have on that language around trying to drop that kind of man up thing, and what kind of language do you think is more useful for us?
Well, can I jump in, because I liked Emily's comments, and I like the word fortify. For me, I'm really passionate about the idea of get back up, and that doesn't mean you know, not be upset, don't cry. You know, I think we're all going to have times when things are tough, but it's about how do I get back up and have another go. And for me, that's what it's all about, is supporting the people around us. You know, right now we're going through COVID. There's a whole bunch of businesses that have shut down and lost businesses. And, you know, right now what the world needs is support to get back up and get going. So for me, I love the idea, instead of man up, it's get back up. How do we get back up and get back into a better space?
Yeah, and even how do we reach your hand down and lift a mate up and be part of that kind of solution. And there's another really great comment on the Zoom chat there from Sam, who says his mate tends to ask, "How are you, mate?" or some version of it, and then when he gets a response, he asks the exact same question again. So rather than having to be intellectual enough to think of, well, what's the best sort of next question, just ask the exact same question a second time and expect to get a deeper, more open response. I think that is fantastic, Sam. Thanks for sharing that. I think that's super valuable. So let me throw to Brodie. I did threaten to ask you about what are your strategies for keeping yourself mentally healthy?
Yeah, so I was sitting here itching as Paul was telling about how he uses humour, and it is exactly the same for me. I was having a conversation the other day, I think it might have been to you, Mike, about how growing up and going through school, and I have a darker skin complexion. I very easily could have been picked on or bullied, but for me, a massive value of mine and a massive coping strategy, which I know that some people might see as a negative, but it really helped for me, was to use humour and to almost to lean into the jabs and absorb them and just say, yeah, like what can I do about it, and then make jokes on my own expense as well. But it was really helpful for me, and it got to a point where, yeah, I was making jokes about myself. I was totally comfortable with who I am. I know that I can't go and change my skin colour tomorrow, but it meant that if anyone was trying to have a go at me with malicious intent, I took the power away from them. And so, yeah, that was a really important part for me. Something that was really important up until COVID. I heard Greg say COVID before, so we've opened the can of worms there. Was going to the gym. I just got myself into a really cool routine. It was the first time I joined a gym, and then it got shut down. So that was a massive part. I know I was feeling so much better and happier and healthier. So that's really important. And doing what I love is probably up there with the most important part of my self-care or staying mentally healthy. I absolutely love what I do. I love coming on to Camp Hero. I love going on the Cape to Cape and giving back to Zero to Hero. It fills me with so much joy and passion, and it just makes me happy.
Excellent. We have had, speaking of passions, we have had one cheeky question on the Q&A here. Brad, you sound like a passionate Kingsley man. Do you have a favourite AFL team, and how much do you reckon they'll win the premiership by this year?
I've had to take all the Collingwood memorabilia down before I started. Look, thanks. That's probably a buddy. I can't see who's written that, but it's
anonymous attendee.
Yeah, I reckon I know who that is. Look, we got beaten by the Eagles a couple of years ago. A couple of contentious free kicks. I won't raise those. Football's been such a big part of my life. It really was my identity for so many years. Like you said, Brodie, when I think you mentioned Buddy Franklin, when he came out sort of a few years ago and expressed, his illness and that he was acknowledging what he was acknowledging. I'm probably a generation before you, and one of my favourite players to watch was a guy called Wayne Schwass, who played for Sydney and North Melbourne, and he was one of the toughest blokes in the footy field. And he's come out recently saying some of the days he struggled the most, you'd never picture. He came out a few years ago, and there was a picture of him being awarded his grand final winning premiership medal, and he said that was one of the toughest days he's ever lived through. He basically wanted to commit suicide there and then, when everyone watching that scene would have just thought you couldn't get any higher than that as a footballer. Wayne's since gone on and he's founded a association called Pucker Up, and they're doing amazing things for especially men's mental health. I'd urge everyone to jump online and have a look at some of the stuff. On a podcast recently, one thing that really was impactful for me was hearing Wayne describe a moment that no doubt we've all been in, whether people acknowledge it or not, but that moment when you're letting it out and telling a mate, and you might shed a tear. The first thing everyone says when they shed that tear is, "I'm sorry," you know, to the person that's there being an ear. Now, why are we sorry? You know, it's almost like you want to thank the bloke for letting you get it out or letting it get off steam, but it's a word sorry that just comes to mind, and everyone would think it. You know, you could ask 100 people what that first word is when they start crying, when they're a bit of a mess and they're you know, having a bit of a D&M or a tell-all or just expressing their emotions. Why is that first word sorry? I can't understand it, and it's even acknowledging that. It's happened to me several times since, and I make such an effort not to use that as a first word, but it just comes out. I don't know, and it's whether it's that systemic thing that we've been teaching boys to not show their emotions for years, and so you're having a moment where you're letting it all out and you're showing your true colours, and you feel you've got to say it, but it's got to start with stuff like that.
Yeah, I think that's huge, Brad, and thanks for bringing that up. I think that's a massively important part around dropping this whole stigma. Like I said, starting to view anxiety, depression, stress, grief, all of those things, just how we would view a stress fracture in the leg, a lung infection, and just talk about the same way we talk about those things. You know, they're more complex issues, but it's only going to start improving when we talk about it. So we've got a few minutes left. So I'd just love to just whip round one more time and just to see if there's any closing comments, anything you'd like for the future, anything you think we can do as men, anyone listening can do to support men, whether you're a woman or a girl or a man or a boy. How can we support men, and what does a bright future look like? If we can just each, maybe just have a quick closing comment. I'll let you go, Greg, first. I know that you have to shoot off in a few minutes.
Yep.
So,
well, thank you,
Greg,
and thank you so much.
I've
thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. It's been great listening to all of your comments and thoughts. It's been fantastic. For me, two closing comments, and the first one follows on from what Brad was saying. I think sometimes we all want to fix stuff, particularly us men. We love fixing stuff, you know. So we hear someone who's going through a rough time, and we see them get, you know, tear up, and we immediately think, "Oh, how can we fix this?" And I think we just got to stop trying to fix stuff. And sometimes you just got to just say nothing. And if anything, you just put an arm on their shoulder, you know. It's just basic tactile touch, you know. That in itself, for me, it's a far more powerful communication in a time of need than saying "I'm sorry." So I 100% agree with Brad. I love what he said. And then the second thing is, I fundamentally believe that we can manage our well-being. We absolutely can take control of how we feel. We can take control of our response to the world around us. And for me, it's about taking personal responsibility for our well-being. And for me, that's the fundamental thing that I teach, is about taking responsibility for your choices, taking responsibility for the way you live your life, and the choice about how you think about the world. And how we think about the world and the situation changes everything about how we feel about the world. So for me, it's about discipline around how we're thinking, which then changes everything for us.
Amazing.
So thank you, guys. It's been really fantastic. Thank you so much.
Thanks for your input. Thanks so much for joining us. How about you, Paul? Have you got any final thoughts? Any hopes for how you'd like us to be as men?
Yep. Look, I'll echo what Greg said there. The fix it issue. I made the mistake early on in the relationship with my wife 25 years ago of trying to come up with solutions when she brought issues to me, and I was told that she didn't want me to fix it. She wanted me to listen. So I very quickly learned that was the best way of approaching that subject. So I completely concur with what Greg said there. I think also we talk about, Brodie's talking about getting into training, going to the gym and being fit and healthy. There's two components to that. Yeah, you can physically get your body healthy, but I think we've got to work on training our brain and training our own mental health. And it does come back to something I've said a couple of times. It's the self-talk. It's about just training us to be a little bit more resilient, to walk through problems that we might be facing and talk through those scenarios by ourselves, and just really recognize that the brain can be trained and we can do something about it. There are lots of great books out there. There's lots of great strategies out there. And I think we certainly as parents, we need to ensure that we're passing this kind of knowledge down to our kids, and that it's okay to train. It's mental health is not a stigma. We've got to try and break that stigma. Mental health, it's not the disability that people think it should be or can get to. So train the brain, talk about it, and make those conversations very open with everybody.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks so much for that. I think that really adds on to Greg's point about having the discipline and knowing that, you know, your brain is just like a muscle. If you train it, you can make yourself healthier. Brodie, any comments from you? Any hopeful thoughts for the future of Australian men from our youngest panellist?
How's that?
That's better. You now.
Fantastic. Classic mistake. For me, as we spoke about before with humour, I'd like to keep saying bye to Greg there. Like to keep humour and know that line. I think one of my favourite lines from the test on Amazon Prime was Justin Langer going on a heap about there can be plenty of banter, but no abuse. And I think that's great. I think it's something that we could implement into so many friend groups around Australia that you know, we know where a line is. I think it's really important, as Brad said before, to be able to be the one to stand up and say, I'm struggling, and maybe open up that conversation, and share. As I said before, it seems that boys and young men are wanting to share. They're wanting to talk about what's going on for them. Just to add to Paul's point about training the brain, you can start to form a habit very quickly. You know, 2 or 3 weeks. I recently read a book called Finding Happiness Through Gratitude, Empathy and Mindfulness by the Resilience Project. And just having 3 things you're grateful for each day, something to finding some form of empathy throughout the day, and having a minute of mindfulness a day can be super influential. So, and gratitude isn't just about saying every day, what am I grateful for? It's just saying, what are 3 things that went well, which makes it a lot easier, I know, for me to find out what I'm grateful for. So they're sort of my things that I want to leave here, and to see men, women, any young adult or child to implement into their life.
Amazing. Thanks, Brodie. And I've just had a comment through from the Facebook feed. We've just had a round of applause for the boys has come through from Brad's mum. So, so I thought I'd throw to you, Brad. Any final closing comments?
I think we've all sort of summarised it pretty well. But even going back to Jeff's question before, it takes a long time to change the conversation. You know, when I was at school, the conversation was about acknowledging and understanding where the line is from bullying to banter. And that conversation's been had with kids ever since, you know, I was at school 20 years ago. I think the next step is, you know, giving our young girls and boys the sort of tools and the social skills to make sure whatever the environment, you know, I think about the environments I'm in every day, and it's so clear what is bullying and what's banter. Yet, you know, Jeff might be in a totally different environment. You know, I think he said he was 50 or, you know, around that age group. You know, he might be in a totally different environment with people that don't have the social skills and the social awareness to pick up on the line has been crossed. So, you know, I just want to be, you know, I just love that we're all being a part of that change and that acknowledgement of what needs to change in the conversations, and so our sort of next lot of leaders can pick it up and be the next lot speaking it in the community, and there's a higher percentage of people that understand what's right and what's wrong in that, and they've got the tools and the skills to talk to others about it and to have people have those conversations with them.
Awesome. Thanks, Brad. And yeah, my last thought is that I honestly and truly believe that one of the biggest ways we can find our way out of this is through mateship. Like I said before, there's those human needs. We need friendship. We need banter. We need to belong to something with a common set of purpose, and we really need a strong, deeper connection. And a lot of us as men don't have that with anyone. We might have it just with our partners, but I think if we really do the work and if we're really courageous enough, we can be that guy for our mates. We can have half a dozen mates who really truly know that we have their backs. And that, to me, like we talk about mateship a lot in this country, and I reckon the way forward for men is to make mateship stronger. Let's be the kind of courageous men that know how to have the courage to have that conversation. Think about being the best possible mate that we can be. So I just want to say massive thanks to everyone who's listening. We will put the numbers for Lifeline is 13 11 14. Lifeline, if you want to know how to support a mate, if you need to support yourself, find the courage. Because as Pete Miller commented on the Facebook, and Pete is an amazing human being, and he says we as individuals are important, and we need to remember that. That actually makes me a little bit emotional to hear that, because sometimes I forget that. But each one of us individually is important, and we need to take the effort and find the courage to make that call when we really need that support, and to do the work and to train ourselves to be healthy and to be better mates. So if you need support, Lifeline is 13 11 14. We'll put that in the chat. Kids Helpline for young people is 1800 55 1800. And there's also the suicide callback service you can call, and they will call you back, 1300 659 467. So Lifeline, I often say, just because it's the easiest number, 13 11 14. And so thank you everyone for coming. Thank you, Brodie. Thank you, Brad. Thank you, Paul. And massive thanks to Brad, to Greg, who dropped off. We're just getting one last message from Ashley. There's a full list of resources that are available on the Zero to Heroes website. If you're new to Zero to Hero, check out the website. Zero to Hero are doing amazing work for young people, creating leaders for the future and breaking this stigma. So get involved in some way. You can donate. You can come on one of our tracks to raise funds, or get a young person to come on Camp Hero and learn how to be a mental health leader. So massive thanks to Zero to Hero and to Ashley for organising this. Massive thanks to Brodie, Paul, Brad and Greg, who had to sneak off early. And once again, to everyone who's listening, thanks for coming. Thanks for listening. Thanks for making this important, and do reach out for help if you need it.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Brad. Thanks, Paul.
Everybody.
Cheers.
Thanks, Brodie.